I would like to, just in the small amount of time available to me, also to address what I think is a fundamental issue. I speak as a political scientist, and I am not a. But what I do think is that if at 8:30 tomorrow evening we vote down the Labour Party motion and the bill which is at the heart of it, we will in fact have done a terrible disservice to Parliament itself. I am in a position to know about Parliament and their powers. And this is, to my mind, an incredibly important moment. What we are deciding to do is little less than what Labour is proposing. And Labour is proposing it out of a history of a party founded in 1912 that chose Parliament as one aspect of politics that needed to be treated with respect, that should be used in a transparent and public way. It exercised a trust that there was no issue that couldn't and should be discussed in Parliament. So my first fundamental assertion in favour of the Labour Party motion is there should be no aspect of policy that is above Parliament. There should be no aspect of policy or the administration of policy from which Parliament should not be excluded, or from which Parliament should not be the prime agency. I'll go further and say, because I listened very carefully to what had been said so far, it is not a correct interpretation of Ms Justice Denham's judgment to suggest that she said, or that the Supreme Court held, that the Parliament had no power to institute inquiries. Her judgment is entirely in relation to the Abilara case. It is also specifically on the issue as to whether, in fact, the committee could effectively try somebody or reach a conclusion which was damaging to another person, to that person's integrity. But it did not exclude, nor did it place integrity in such a position as if it could defeat policy. What is happening here this evening is the acceptance of an under-Labourer version of Parliament. I would put this too. I go so far as to say this as somebody who believes in a rugged Parliament, committed to transparency, to its public work, to extending its deepening democracy, that if this bill, which Deputy Rabbit worked on and produced, was found unacceptable, and if we had to go to a constitutional referendum, it would have been the right thing to do. Because you cannot go on in a position in which you have members of Parliament themselves, disgracefully in the case of Minister Eamon Ryan, and I say that with sadness, to hear him describing oppositional voices and views in this Parliament to which we are elected as squabbles is a pathetic indicator, sadly, of a party that is weak on its commitment to equality and democracy, even if it is strong on the environment. And he can reply to that elsewhere. He and I can debate that elsewhere. But I do say this, going through to what is clear here, going to what is the net of this. The nub of this is about the role of Parliament and parliamentarians. You then turn, in fact, to the role of committees. We spent a very great deal of time in here recently talking about reform of the parliamentary process. Well, it would be ridiculous to suggest that we'd spend our energies deciding whether we would meet at 9:30 or 10:30, and we wouldn't express our energies in saying we want no obstacle to be placed in the way of a committee of inquiry. Certainly, if you take Deputy Rabbit's bill and you look at it in detail, it respects the integrity of the individual, nor does it dislodge the legal process or within the division of powers. But you could argue it quite the other way. Parliamentarians are self-inflicting a wound on themselves by taking an interpretation of the Abilara judgment which is excessive and which cannot be sustained. I also think as well that even if it was their view, and this is about democracy, if it is your view, Minister of State, I say through you, sir, that I am wrong, well then I can say to you, test the bill. And if I am wrong about the bill, then test it in a constitutional referendum. But I am elected here to say that ultimately the public elects representatives, that representatives must never be excluded from examining any aspect of policy, its administration or its consequences. On another occasion I will expand on this and say that powers have been given from this House to NRAs, HSEs and elsewhere, which have effectively removed the power of accountability which representatives had. And we are the worse for it. I will return to that on another occasion. But I would say in relation to this here, what is involved. What of the public to which all of us return and who view our proceedings? I suggest something else. That they would like to think that the Parliament that they elect in a representative sense is capable of seeking and obtaining such expert and technical advice as is necessary to give the accountable democratic decision. They are not saying you must immediately say you are not competent and you hand, as it were, sideways to an expert opinion, that for which we have elected you. If that is your view, get out of Parliament. Frankly, Parliament, we come in here, we seek the expert opinions that are necessary to sustain us in an informational sense, to form a decision. But we take the decision and we don't shirk it. And unlike Deputy Ryan, Minister Ryan, we take it as much as possible as Labour is committed, in public, answering the public's concerns, and doing so in a fully transparent way. I think as well, the public looking on will look at something else. What would, for example, what would restore Ireland's reputation internationally? Is the restoration of Ireland's reputation served by the complex private structure which we have heard from the government amendment? Or is it best served by what Labour's proposing in relation to giving full public ventilation to all of the issues? I should say this in order to be entirely helpful. Labour would not have opposed a scoping report, as I have pointed out, to identify all the complex issues that might be there. But we are insistent on the role of Parliament, and we feel, frankly, that we will damage ourselves. It does, irrespective, as I said, I would not speak personally, and I do not do so, irrespective of who forms government or the opposition. It is important that we do not lose the strength that our committees are weak. In the future, committees being formed will, I hope, be at arm's length from government itself. A committee system for which the government of the day retains the majority does not have a sufficient arm's-length distance. In future committees in the Scandinavian system or elsewhere, they too, not only does the government not have a monopoly of investigation or establishing legislation, such committees have autonomy to initiate, amend and change legislation. What we need in here are parliamentarians who will not say this is too complex for us, or parliamentarians who say we will give to this unaccountable body policy decisions that we should be taking, or saying to another group when we have actually the public are concerned, as indeed they are now, on this issue here. We will have a scoping report. Okay, I say to that. We will then, following that, have another wise man, wise woman commission, which in fact will decide on what are the great issues that are beyond Parliament, but they're not beyond the public. The public know very well, and we don't. I'm not particularly interested in the names of the individuals involved, but what I am interested in is that a political decision was taken to say what we must have in this country is regulation with a light touch, and that minister who said that later became a commissioner and went to different countries in Scandinavia and suggested, you should have regulation with a light touch like us.
1 minute, Deputy.
That is a fundamental policy decision which was taken by somebody who was elected in here. And then again, all of us, as we face into all of this long year now, the public will ask only one question. Is all of this exercise about, as somebody said, we're getting out of the storm? Is it about restoring calm, so that all the reckless navigation can go on all over again? Or is it, as Minister Linehan, and I liked him his remark when he made it, about establishing an entirely different culture about banking, politics and regulation? And if it is about establishing an entirely regulation, let's hear it from all sides of this House and all of the political parties, that they are in favour of a different system entirely, that they will oppose any covert or overt attempt to try and keep the old racket going. And a racket it was. And let us also hear in the reply to our debate at least this much. that no individual will be protected in any way, that no file will be retained from any of the investigations that are going on. But I finish by saying this. I'm in this House, there are many defects with it. But what I think is outrageous is that tomorrow night at 8:30, Parliament would decide, without analysing it properly, that it should lose the competence itself to give the lead in an investigation, or that it would lose the opportunity to strengthen its committee structure to give it the power to investigate any matter of public policy.